Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and nice to meet you all. And honestly, it's my first time in the Southeast Asia, so I'm very excited to be here. Okay, so my talk will be a little bit different than all the talks you have heard because I mostly work in the northern area of the hemisphere. And indeed, I will. Okay, yes, you see, northern hemisphere. You see this is the map of the permafrost. So the permafrost is defined as a frozen soil, a ground that's been like under 0 degrees Celsius for 2 consecutive years. So that's how we actually define it. And as you can see, like I've circled this red, that's Mongolia. The Mongolia, the 60 to 65% of the Mongolian territory used to be underlined by permafrost. However, the recent article came out by the Dr. Jambaljo, and according to his team and new mapping technique, the permafrost extension has been like basically considered 30% of the territory. So basically, we lost like half of the permafrost we had. So that's actually affecting into our ecosystems. So that's basically, if you don't know about the permafrost, that's the permafrost. It's a frozen layer, and then on top of it, there's a like seasonally freezing and thawing layer. We call it active layer. And you can see there's ice wedge, basically big ice just in the middle of the ground. And some of the permafrost is actually low in the ice content, and the others actually rich in the ice content. So depending on the ice rich or like ice poor, sometimes it can actually thaw or it can actually degrade. It can just slump out, and we call it karst lakes. So basically, whole ground is just slumped, and there's going to be a lake. So those kind of things goes on. So we are we're basically monitoring this permafrost using the big temperature sensors in the boreholes. So borehole is basically like a well. It's very thin, 5 centimeter diameter, very deep hole into the ground. Casing, steel casing or like plastic casing, and we actually put the sensors in there and then we measure. And what we found is that like this temperature is increasing, and also this active layer is increasing. And that's the result. And so why it's important is that the permafrost actually like plays big role in our ecosystems. First of all, it's actually a big reservoir for the carbon. And during the late Holocene or like on the old days, the carbon has been just frozen there and stored there away from the microbes rich. So that's obviously important for the climate change. The other one is the hydrology. I will talk about it a little bit later in my slides, and then ecosystem communities. So as you can see here, like this permafrost, like now the carbon in, carbon out, and this actually just small carbon gain and just doing nothing. And as it thaws, the active layer thickens, which is actually good for short term because then plants can actually sequester more carbon and store more soil, more carbon into the soil. However, when we actually go really deep, we start respiring these old carbons from this frozen layer. So that's not exactly good. And the main thing, for example, why I actually say that it's really important for the Mongolians is that the permafrost is actually a barrier. It acts as a barrier between this surface water, not surface water, shallow groundwater and deep groundwater. So as you can see here in the top picture, you can see there's a lake, and there's a small talc. We call it talc because it's unfrozen sometimes. And when the precipitation actually falls, it can recharge this lake and the other lake. But there is a disconnection between this shallow groundwater and deep groundwater. However, when there is a permafrost actually degrades and the open talc forms, then there's this shallow groundwater and the deep groundwater can actually interact. In that way, the whole hydrology of the system can actually change. In some areas, it actually increases the surface water, like for example, as you can see, there's expanding lake or river. However, in some other places, it can actually decrease the lake or water. In many places, like for example in Mongolia, the forest map, the extent of the forest is actually overlaps with the permafrost extension. And the idea behind is that like probably the active layer is very shallow in the northern Mongolia. It's like 10, 15 or 20 centimeters in July. So basically in the northern Mongolia, if you dig down to the soil, at the 20 centimeter, you will find frozen soil. So like that means like all the like rainfall can be reachable for the plants to drink up, I guess, plant to use up. And so the rain comes really late in Mongolia, like in July, starting in July. So that means that all the trees and plants can actually use the snow water or like a little bit of water during this dry period. So that's why we need this permafrost. Okay, so there's a monitoring network of this for the permafrost, and we also like the member of this circumpolar active layer monitoring and also the ground temperature network for the permafrost monitoring. And as I said before, the most boreholes are 10 to 50 meters, but we have several really deep boreholes. Okay, so now you can see there's an anomaly shifting in those three areas. There's a Huskol, Hangahinti, and those three mountainous areas. So, and all of those increasing trends are statistically significant. And there's, as I mentioned before, we have we have impact of the climate change. Also, another impact is the anthropogenic impact. So, anthropogenic impact means that, like, basically the grazing and the forestry, logging the forest. However, there's an article in, I believe, yes, in 2020 by Bir Zimov. They basically call it Pleistocene Zoo, if I remember correctly. So the basic idea is they try to actually let herbivore go into this permafrost affected area, and they thought that grazing and trampling by this big herbivore, the snow, it can be really good for the restoring the permafrost, which has been actually shown here. This inside the park, you can see that the temperature has been reached minus 15 compared to the outside of the park, which is the minus 10. So basically, the idea is that they think that the grazing is actually good for the permafrost. So that's actually quite questionable in our mind, and let's see what we find out. So basically, we try to look into the three big problems we have. The one is the warming and climate change, and the other one is the forest loss and the grazing and moving. So for the warming, we basically simulated this climate change using the open-top chamber. Use it a lot in the Alaskan region. So it raises their temperature by 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It doesn't exactly work as a greenhouse gas, but it's basically just shields from the wind, and it has a lot of artifacts, but it works. Okay. So for that, we basically had I'm gonna actually present like two different studies. The one is done in the Huskol and Hinti area. It's a grazing experiment, basically grazes versus fenced disclosure and what's happened, and the forest, one intact forest versus the cleared open forest. And the other one is actually just the grazing and warming has been done, and it has been done, it's in a very small peatland area. So basically 2 kilometers away there's a permafrost, there's a place with underlined by permafrost, and then there's a site without permafrost. So we basically compared how these two sites, just 2 kilometers away from each other, behave different, behave in response to grazing and also the warming simulation. Okay, there's some field site photos. As you can see, that's the host goal area, and I believe Dr. knows this place really well. So that's, as you can see from our previous, previous speakers, that the field areas are actually hard to reach sometimes. So as you can see, basically that's how we actually struggle. But anyway, so what we find out here is that this graph shows summer and winter temperature difference between this open versus open minus the forest area. So we had temperature data loggers actually. We have the temperature data loggers at 2 centimeters under the surface and 50 centimeter depth. What we find, sorry about this, this height, because it basically subtracted from the temperature from the open area minus the temperature of the forested area. So the basically plus means cooling, minus means warming. So it's just a little bit confusing. Okay, the forest sites are cooler by the 4.3 degrees Celsius in summer, but no significant change in the winter. However, in the Hinti area, which is actually kind of softer, southern part, a little bit softer, and then the actually degrading more in terms of the increasing activity more, but temperature is not increasing as much as the host goal, as it's actually because it's a little bit softer and it's a little bit warmer permafrost there. And forest sites actually cooler by the 2.7 degrees Celsius, but warmer in the winter time. And so basically we find that yes, the forest actually helps the ground to be cooler. So, and then as I mentioned before, we have measured this. We had 2 different types of the grazing for in the host goal area as well as in Hinti, but we lost one of the plots, so there's no data. What we find was that in the host goal heavy and host goal area, there is a heavy grazing area, and this area is actually a little bit dry and sandy soil. So in that case, the grazing actually removed the vegetation, so surface temperature increased a lot, and as well as the soil temperature in the 50 centimeter. However, in the light grazed areas, it is actually very tussocky area, peatland dominated, so very moist. In that area, light grazing indeed actually reduces this temperature in the summertime, and there's especially the winter time, the temperature was significantly colder, basically corroborating the results from this Beers article. So basically, what we found was that the grazing intensities actually matters, as well as this where do you actually graze. That was the 2 take-home messages. So as I saved those, so I'm gonna go further. Okay, so the other one is actually a very interesting area. It is actually wetland, peatland, and this area is actually breeding ground of the white crane, white-napped crane, which is the endangered species, and really interesting area to actually study permafrost. And we believe that it's a kind of relic permafrost, meaning that the air temperature is plus, mean annual air temperature is plus, so that means that there's no way to permafrost exist there. However, the permafrost exists there because of this peatland. So as I mentioned before, the permafrost and the ecosystem, they have really interconnection with each other. The forest and the peatland generally protects the permafrost, and permafrost helps the forest and peatland to be there through this hydrological cycle. Okay, and but however, in these peatland areas has also again has some problems. So basically, the livestock, as you can see, the grazing is the big problem in Mongolia, and that's actually like the problem for this wetland as well. So as you can see here, this Pasaki Hamaki area is underlined by permafrost. The other one is not underlined by there's no permafrost basically. The active seasonal layer is there. So you can see the difference, and also you can see the difference between what grazing actually does. This. Okay, so the basic idea was we have to choose one chamber treatment. There is a chamber. In the chamber, there's a okay, sorry, it's the labeling is messed up. Okay, one is the rectangle ones should be open areas, and hexagonal ones should be chamber, and green ones should be natural ones, and yellow ones should be like moved ones. But we didn't actually mess up in the field. And we measured land temperature, soil temperature, and soil temperature at the 20 centimeter depth. And also we have the boreholes equipment there. The borehole depth of the boreholes are basically 10 meter. And the idea is basically based on the surface temperature, we can actually predict this, estimate the ground temperature as well as the thickness of the active layer, using the either Stefan's equation or like T-top models. And idea is to see how those simulations affect the surface temperature, and further on we would like to model using the borehole data. Okay. Okay. So now there's this graph shows the temperature effect, and as you again, it's a difference, showing the difference. So blue one is showing the difference between grazed one versus natural one, grazed minus natural one. The plus signs showing that it's the moved ones is actually, grazed ones. We simulated grazing by just clipping the moving. So that ones is actually greater in temperature, and the blue ones are open ones, and the yellow, orange ones in the chamber. So for the permafrost area, so the first two are temperature data from the permafrost area, and moving has increased this ground surface temperature by 3.1 degrees Celsius, and at the 20 centimeter, the moving affected to the ground temperature and increased the ground temperature by 2.3 degrees Celsius. However, in the non-permafrost area, the moving didn't change the temperature significantly. So basically, the grazing itself is not exactly just removing the vegetation itself is not exactly the full story. It is like so many different stories, depending on whether you have the permafrost, and depending on whether the area is moist or dry. It has a lot of different things. Okay, so the key, also another key important message we actually got from this experiment is that like the moving had actually much more, twice as much as impact on this ground temperature than this warming effect only. So that means that probably in some places in Mongolia, the grazing might have actually surpassed this climate change impact. And as I mentioned before, there's a moving and chamber, also deep active layer. You can see. So basically, what we found is that so there is the air temperature signal, so it's warming, and then there's a vegetation canopy, like either it's either it's a forest or it's a grassland. It's basically, first of all, it's actually shades, and then it has actually transpires or lowers the evaporation or increase the evaporation, depending on whether there's a shading or not. So what we found is that, for example, in the area with enough moisture, when we actually did this moving experiment, basically the soil moisture had increased, meaning that there's not much plant to actually transpire. And then it's actually interacted with this peatland or organic layer, and this peatland and organic layer actually behaves really differently, whether it's actually in the summertime or in the wintertime. So in the wintertime, it's actually conducts the coldness into the ground really well, so the conductivity is so good. But in summertime, it's actually insulates. It's basically stores a lot of heat itself, so it helps the permafrost to be there. And then there is a signal actually attenuates, and then there's a permafrost. So why I mean the whole area is that this peatland is protecting this permafrost is that because it has a lot of insulating effects. Okay. Okay, that's the story about the temperature part. But now actually I'm going to move into the carbon story. So then, now we have looked into the carbon storage as well. So we looked into whether there's this steppe area or the forest area, which one is actually store more carbon, below ground, above ground. And what we found is that but the key thing is it's in northern Mongolia, so it's not exactly exemplary of the whole Mongolia. It can't actually represent the whole Mongolia. So in northern Mongolia, in the Uskol area, so the above ground, we have a lot of carbon in the above ground, and also we have a lot of carbon in the below ground, but the carbon in the below ground between the forest and steppe doesn't matter. It just kind of same. And we goes into the bedrock. Then again, the question is how does the grazing would affect into this carbon, and we found that the grazing actually decreases the carbon stored in the ground. And we looked into also the respiration. So interesting thing about the soil respiration, what we found is that in the forested area, of course, this respiration, microbial respiration responds to the temperature. As temperature increases, this respiration increases. So it responds really strongly to the temperature. But in the in the steppe area, which is dry steppe grassland area, it doesn't respond to the temperature. Basically, moisture limitation is the key factor there. That's what we found. And as you can see, in the forest, there's a black one is a warmed chamber, the warmed area using this opened up chamber. So when we simulate increasing the air temperature by 1 degree Celsius, we basically simulating this soil respiration more in the forested area, but we didn't see that kind of differences in the riparian and the steppe area. So in those areas, actually, the moisture is much more limiting factor. And so that's we also looked into this, how the soil respiration is actually sensitive to the warming. And as you can see, here's the 3 areas. The green one is, I believe, forest, and the middle one is riparian area, middle riparian area, or peatland, and the other one is dry steppe. And as you can see, the both riparian area and also the steppe area, they are actually not responding so well to the temperature, not so sensitive to the temperature. It's just about the norm. However, in the forested area, which is actually colder, we found a strong sensitivity to the temperature. However, when we, but when we using this open-top chamber to warm those areas, what we found is that like in the forest area, you can see that the temperature sensitivity had decreased, meaning that if we warm well, the soil gonna respire more carbon in the future in the forested area. However, its response to the temperature will actually decrease. That's what we found. And it may be actually, we hypothesized that it might be actually related to this this carbon lability, like how labile the carbon is and how much carbon there is. And the story between the riparian area and steppe area is actually quite different, because the riparian area is actually wet. However, it doesn't respond to this temperature or like the moisture as well. In the steppe area, the soil respiration responds really well to this moisture. Okay, finally, again, we also looked into the grazing. So we always look at the warming, like not warming, the climate change plus grazing. So as you can see, there's this graph actually showing two different things. The one is total soil flux. Basically, it's the soil respiration plus plant respiration. The other one is just only the soil respiration. And again, it's showing the grazed versus non-grazed areas, as well as this chamber, OTC, the black one, warmed areas, and the control is just a normal control area. And as you can see here, this total total carbon flux from the soil in the chamber is lower than this control area, a little bit, not statistically significant. It's because those plots were actually located in the steppe area, not in the forest. So in the steppe, again, the soil respiration is limited by the soil moisture. But as usual, as we expected or as we hypothesized, the grazed areas had less total soil flux than the not grazed areas because they had less plants to actually respire. However, in this, when we actually measured the soil, just the soil moisture, the grazed areas had statistically significantly slightly higher soil respiration. We basically hypothesized that, like, since the grazing was really light in that area, that probably the light grazing induced a much more carbon allocation into the roots, and then that might actually lead into the more respiration from the soil. Okay, there is some limitations. We don't have much. We have some idea about the winter snow amount, but we don't know exactly how much and the thickness and density of the snow. However, the snow plays a big role in the ground temperature. So we're hoping that our just the ground temperature separated by the summer versus winter would tell us hopefully. And but like this, and also this warming is very mild, 1.5 degrees Celsius, and basically we don't know whether those systems actually reached in the equilibrium or not. And the most of the studies, especially the soil respiration and soil carbon studies, are located only in the northern Uskal Mountains area, and so we don't know much about the other areas as well. Okay, so basically, the take-home message is that first of all, there's a vegetation is really strong insulation in Mongolia for either it's forest or peatland, and so this system protects the permafrost to be there. And we believe that most of the marginal permafrost in Mongolia is ecosystem protected rather than this climate-driven permafrost like in Canada or in Alaska. And the second of all, this vegetation removal or the grazing may actually affect it much more stronger than the climate change in Mongolia. But again, depending on the temperature versus, and also how much grazing. And the grazing is not exactly this, like intense grazing versus the light grazing has a very different ecological consequences in those ecosystems. And also, yes, the warming accelerates carbon release, and that's we have high temperature sensitivity now, but we don't know much about like how that would change in terms of because we don't know whether much of this carbon is readily decomposable carbon or it's actually much more older, very concentrated carbon. So with that, I would like to know what you think, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.